Okay, we're going to move on. We're going to stay with the tech industry, and we're going to move on. And the next panel is called Culture Wars, the Hill versus the Valley. And we're going to look again at this idea that the tech industry is at the cutting edge, and it's, but it's at the same time, and it's supposed to be, California is supposed to be so progressive, and at the same time, we have this very, very male-dominated industry that is really, at times, not at all diverse. So to discuss the perception and the reality of all of this, we have three panelists, one of whom is running slightly late. So we're going to start off with just two of the panelists, and they are Sion Bannister, who is a partner at Founders Fund, and Vikram Iyer, who's Vice President of Public Policy and Strategic Communications at Postmates. Please welcome them. Vikram, I'll start with you, if I may, because you kind of see both sides of this. At the moment, you work for Postmates, which is an on-demand logistics company, but you've previously done things in DC on the political side in the Obama administration and so on. So how do you characterize the relationship between the Hill and the Valley with respect to the issues that we've been talking about today?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here, and sorry that I am representing as a male in a male-dominated industry. What I see right now is that there's this rise of the CEO statesman or stateswoman or statesperson, wherein regardless of what your politics might be in Washington, D.C., there's a lot of inertia that is preventing, legislation from moving into Congress, and a lot of activity going on at the federal level in the executive branch that are giving a lot of companies pause. And whether that is a newly enacted trans ban in the military for patriotic service members who are claimed or deemed not fit enough to serve by this White House, or whether it is an immigration overture that we disagree with, or maybe it's the withdrawal from the Paris Climate Accords for those that are environmentally minded. Drip by drip, you see more and more companies at the CEO level try and use their product or whatever digital real estate they have in their products to opine on that matter, opine on matters of state. And this has, for a company like Postmates, actually been a fairly new undertaking, but it's incredible the pace and rate at which we've leaned into it. It started on the heels of the travel ban, announcing a declaration of our ethos and values, given that so many folks on our platform that are delivering goods to us or delivering goods from merchants that may back of house be chefs that are immigrants or employees at our company that may be on H-1B visas. It started with a declaration about why we want to be inclusive about all of them. It has quickly progressed to, on the heels of Pride Month coming up just at week after next, a partnership that we'll be announcing with the ACLU focused on LGBTQ advocacy as well as women reproductive rights advocacy. And while Postmates, at the end of the day, for those of you who may be familiar with it or may not be familiar with it, is often used as a lazy Sunday burrito delivery service, we do have over 150,000 active couriers, what we call our Postmates, that are making deliveries at any given moment. We have several million customers across 300 US cities, and that means that we have a voice, and while we understand at times we may splinter off certain elements of our users, we also feel like now is the time to use that voice for purpose and use it for good, and that's a responsibility that I think more and more companies are seeing, and especially as there's a cloud of concern coming from federal regulators, being part of that purpose-driven conversation, frankly, can also enable and help the bottom line or shield folks from sort of the eye of just carte blanche scrutiny versus a little bit more of a mindful approach to how you're positioning that company in the community.
So would you say that the tech industry is sort of ahead of the curve in this idea of the CEO statesman or stateswoman? Is this something that the tech industry is living up to the stereotype of being more progressive and more engaged on?
I would love to hear her views, just given the perspective across a range of companies, but I would say no. I would say woefully behind, but because almost every product that we have has a digital backend, you can group monolithically that tech has been leaning into this more and more. We saw famously Tim Cook at Apple go toe-to-toe with the FBI on data encryption positions. We've seen Reddit and folks that have exited Reddit make very clear declarations when it comes to the treatment of women in the workplace. We've even seen Salesforce and Mark Benioff be very vocal about climate implications. So there are luminary leaders, but but I think the time is now for more and more of them to not only learn from one another, but to also learn that when a company weighs in this approach, it's not because of some charitable, nice-to-do cherry on top. It can be a very, very important brand differentiator for companies, which impacts the bottom line. And B, it can be a really good thought leadership replacement of a vacuum that all too often we are seeing emanating from at least our federal position in terms of thought leadership. So I think that we've seen it. We should applaud those that are leaning into it, but there's a lot more work to do.
Great, thank you. Simon, do you agree with that characterization?
Well, a lot of our companies in our portfolio have a variety of different approaches. Postmates is one of our companies. Airbnb has been pretty vocal. I think that it's also important to point out that diversity comes in all sorts of different forms, including neurodiversity, ideological diversity, age diversity. And so recently I helped a company with their anti-harassment policies. And one of the things they were thinking about was, okay, how can we be inclusive to people with actually different political ideas? Because I know that is sort of a contentious topic, but at the same time, people have not only customers, but employees who have a wide variety of political beliefs. And so I think alienating them is not the right solution to creating more open minds. And so I've started seeing some companies create, that as part of their inclusion initiative. And I think that's a great path forward to include that along with all sorts of other things, including, anti-harassment, gender, lack of gender discrimination and things like that as well. So every company, we have hundreds of companies and they're all addressing this in their own way. But we've definitely seen a movement towards people being more proactive.
You've spent your career in tech and VC, which are two notoriously male-dominated fields. So just stepping back and looking at the broader picture, on the one hand, there's this reputation for being progressive and cutting edge, and on the other hand, there's this reputation for being very, the bro culture and all the rest of it. How have you seen things change recently? Are things moving in the right direction?
I think things are moving in the right direction, yes, because when I started out in the industry, there was only one or two people who I could look up to that are female or, represented kind of who I am. But however, all of my mentors, all of the people that helped me get to where I am were men. And so I don't think that, I haven't had a lot of the experiences that I've heard about from other people. And I have not experienced personally bro culture. Maybe it's just because of the types of work that I do or the people that I hang out with. That was never the case. And so, but not to diminish other people's experiences. And I do think it is getting better because more and more I'm starting to see, especially in like augmented reality in different fields, more engineers heading that direction that are female and are more diverse. And so I do think that times are changing, and it could just be that there's an artistic, emotional storytelling element to augmented reality that resonates. I'm not really sure why, but definitely seeing a lot more traction there with founders and engineers.
And what's the role of investors like you in promoting diversity and inclusion?
So at Founders Fund, this is one of the reasons why I like working there is, I feel that I can be myself, and I am cyan first and foremost. My gender was not a consideration in me being hired. And so I do truly believe that when people walk in through our door, that is not at the top of our mind when we're meeting a founder. We are looking for ideas and good companies first and foremost. And I think that we don't see someone come in and say, you are all of these labels. It's just like, what are you working on, and is it interesting? And if so, then we would want to invest.
The implication is that you think other VC firms are still thinking in those terms. Is this the kind of character, the stereotype of the white guy in the hoodie who I want to back?
Possibly. I hear people say that. They're just like, oh, that person doesn't look like Mark Zuckerberg. They don't fit the central casting. Sure. But those aren't the things that we look for. We're looking for, oftentimes we're pursuing companies without even knowing who's behind them. For me, I do consumer tech. And so if I see something rising on the charts in the App Store, I do a lot of different things. I'm a generalist, but that's one thing that I do. I go and I reach out to the founder. I don't even care who they are. What they're building is interesting, and if it's interesting and it speaks for itself, I'm going to invest in it, and that ends up, naturally helping diversity. I think the other thing is that I work on Max Levchin from Affirm said something really great. He said, every time you do an event or you're doing something, try to reach out to the smartest people you don't know. And so I've started doing that because it turns out that's a really great way to start expanding your circle, because otherwise you end up just reinforcing sort of your own social graph, and that's how to break out of that, I think.
So how do you find the smartest people you don't know?
By
definition, you don't know them. So.
Yeah, you don't know them. Right. So one, I ask people for recommendations, like who are 2 people at the top of your list that I need to know. Sometimes I go on LinkedIn and I just reach out cold. And I'm like, wow, this person has a really interesting position in this company, and they're a product manager. I want to meet them. The other thing is that I purposely, for better or worse, will friend people on Facebook and Twitter that are completely different than me in every possible way. The only problem with that is, like, if I post something, sometimes like a huge war will break out on my feed. But at the same time, it exposes me to different ideas. I think living in a monoculture, in a bubble of people who think just like you, is not healthy.
So we need to follow a more diverse group of. There have been startups that have tried to do this, haven't they? They've tried to find, people who agree with you on one issue but may disagree with you on a political issue, and then you're more likely to engage with them because you have sport or cars or whatever in common.
That was a huge trend for a while. Everybody thought that you would want things completely custom tailored to you and your interests. And to some degree that works for advertising, but it doesn't work for expanding your mind. And so,
well, the idea was they were tailored to you except in this one respect.
Correct.
They completely disagree with you on something. So. But that's a classic kind of engineers can fix this engineers fallacy, presumably.
Correct.
We were talking just beforehand about bathroom lines as a proxy for gender imbalance, and I wondered, well, tell us about that.
Yeah. So we were just talking about this backstage, and I don't think that it obviously is the golden standard for whether or not we're doing a good job, but I was noting that when I go to YC Demo Day, when I first started going to it, it's an event, startup event in Silicon Valley. There was no line for the female restroom, none, and there was a line about 100, 200 people deep for the male restroom. And of course, they didn't just open up the female restroom because it's just a toilet, right? But now I'm noticing that I have to wait. And I'm like, wow, that's interesting. You do notice. You're like, anytime I have to wait in a line for a bathroom, I'm just like, oh, well, that's different. So that's something, I'm not saying that.
Or you could just have non-gender specific bathrooms like we have here. So.
Correct, yeah. I noticed that here. This was pretty awesome. There's gender neutral bathrooms, which is amazing.
Okay, Vikram, I wanted to ask you, because we just heard from Brian Krzanich about diversity and recruitment in particular at a big company. And I wanted to ask you, as a startup that's growing very fast, how do you, in a growth phase, how do you ensure that you're recruiting in a diverse way and that you can kind of hold on to those values as you grow?
I think it harkens back to exactly what Cyan said, which is if you keep an eye towards interesting thinkers, appropriate talent, and the right fit for the goals or the problem statements that you're trying to tackle, all of a sudden you will end up recruiting across a tapestry of types of individuals. So at our company, we're actually quite proud. Postmates, our head of recruiting is a Latina mother. Our head of finance is a woman who's been at the company for quite some time. But I don't think it's enough for us to hang our hats on just the symbolism that some people at the helm own along the way. What we've seen over time is that, and this is actually a declaration that our CEO sent internally on the heels of International Women's Day, that it is important that as we grow rapidly to not only take stock of like our needs as a company, but ensure that we invest in the pipeline development of talent internally, right? I think when we talk about diversity and inclusion, it's often easy to assume that that's an external engagement of taking a look at resumes and trying to make sure that you're both fulfilling a need of the company from a talent perspective and perhaps filling or executing against a D&I outlook. However, there are also lots and lots of talented frontline workers, whether they're coders, they're designers, marketers, that might be of different backgrounds within the company or different genders within the company. And on the heels of International Women's Day, our CEO and our head of finance, Kristen Schaefer, actually announced an internal working group focused on the women of Postmates, for example, as a chance to suss out and talk through what are the challenges that we might be facing as a company when it comes to management development for those that are already in the company, and how can we make sure that they feel that they have not only a safe space to air out some of those concerns, but also a path to development to become managers one day, to then ladder up to executives the next. So I think as a company, anyone you would talk to would say that there's a lot more that we ought to do to get better, but I think that we're starting to recognize that and make concerted steps to try and institutionalize or codify some of those pipelines. But I will say, sort of zooming out a little bit from just our own company and sort of speaking to, you know, the namesake of this panel, when you think of Capitol Hill and Silicon Valley, and you know, Brian spoke to this a little bit, and I know it's been resonating throughout the conversation today. There can oftentimes be a distance or a disconnect between the two entities, right? Of just government and the tech sector, or just the private sector. That's not a novel statement. We all know that there might be things happening in the private sector that government doesn't totally appreciate, but feels a reflex to regulate. And conversely, there might be things that government feels appropriate to try and scrutinize or lean into that the industry community feels like you're really slowing us down and preventing progress and stymieing research and development dollars going into what it actually needs to be devoted to, which is innovation. The problem is right now, almost as everything has a digital backend, as I mentioned earlier, everything is quote unquote seen as a tech matter. And now there are two interests emanating from Capitol Hill that are unstoppable. One, a new class of members of Congress that are rotating in as more retire out, that are all trying to fundraise and raise money from Silicon Valley. And number two, a hyper need, whether it's because of artificial intelligence, whether it's because of autonomous vehicles, whether it's because of platform or on-demand or gig economy and sharing economies impacting the nature of work and what jobs look like in America. Because of this confluence of concerns from a regulatory mentality, you have a lot more lawmakers looking at the tech industry, not just as a means to fundraise, but as a place that really needs to add rules of the road. And that is okay, because we see that it's not about regulation being bad, it's about informing smart regulation. But when it comes to diversity and inclusion in particular, we've actually seen direct letters coming from the Congressional Black Caucus and the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, most recently in September, October, that went to about 32 technology platforms, asking them to articulate how are you recruiting, what is the makeup of your diversity numbers internally, and how do you plan to change that over time? That's only one example of issues that Congress or others are focused on, but when you have that kind of level of scrutiny, not only in terms of how is your product going to change jobs in America, but how are you staffing your company to inform that product, you have a very different ballgame which demands building inroads and two-way communication streams between the Hill and the Valley. And I would say if there's a silver lining to focusing on these problems and exposing their problems, at best it is creating a bit of a forced conversation, which is a really important starting point if we're going to allow R&D to flourish while still trying to build rules of the road that don't encumber that R&D being invested.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm very glad to say that Jessica Matthews is here, so please welcome Jessica Matthews to the stage.
Okay. Good to see you. How are you?
Hello, very good to have you here. So Jessica is founder and CEO of Uncharted Power, which is a quite interesting renewable energy startup. So we should probably just quickly tell us what your company does.
Sure. So first, apologies. New York is a wonderful and very chaotic and unpredictable place, but I'm happy to be here.
Great to have you here.
Happy to have made it here. A whole other panel on how that happened. But yeah, so Uncharted Power is my company, and it is an energy technology company. We've been around now for over 7 years and have actually developed a pretty exciting patent portfolio entirely related to making renewable, decentralized energy a real thing. So thinking about first generation, where we've really specialized in kinetic energy, or the energy from motion, really harnessed from everyday living, like the way that you walk on the floor, the way you drive, the way that you play and live your life, as well as quite a bit of work done in distributed energy transmission, as well as efficient storage, and thinking about that network. And so essentially, our clear kind of focus has ultimately been to get people to rethink where they get their energy from, how they get their energy, and to actually design the technology that allows them to have that kind of future perspective about what energy can be, making that a reality.
Excellent. So an example of this is a speed bump, and as a car drives over it, basically you're pushing it down, captures some energy, and then you can use that to power lights on a pedestrian crossing or something.
So when I was 19 years old, our first product was actually a soccer ball, an energy-generating soccer ball that could harness the kinetic energy from play. And then you could store that power inside of the ball to use as an off-grid power source. Fast forward 11 years, I'm 30, and feel like I like it. That's why I like telling people. I like telling people I'm 30. I feel grown. And you're not gonna meet many millennials who have done the same thing for 11 years straight. So I'm just gonna, so over the last 11 years, we took that same technology and we looked at how we can put it into the road, how we can put it into speed bumps, yes, how we can put it into floor panels. And you come to our lab uptown, we actually went ahead and built a prototype of the Black Panther suit. Because quite frankly, it's a material that harnesses the kinetic energy to do cool Black Panther, I don't know, patented things that, trademark things that Marvel has. But quite frankly, I am the real Shuri. I was that before that came out. So we went ahead and made one of those too. So
excellent.
We do all of that stuff.
Okay, so I think we've established then
yes,
you've got some innovative, technology, and we've just been hearing, I think, quite a sort of optimistic view about diversity in the tech industry. And what's your experience of that been? How diverse and open is Silicon Valley really?
Silicon Valley's not diverse at all. No, I think it's a disaster. I'm optimistic about the role that diversity would play in the global, perhaps macro entrepreneurial and technological market, because ultimately, if you think about how Silicon Valley started, right, it was just this open abyss, and you have this guy who had to move to an area because his mom was sick, and I think he started a semiconductor company right before Intel, right?
Fairchild, is that the one?
Fairchild Semiconductor, right? And so this is a guy who's like, oh, I guess I have to be here because my mom is sick, and I got to be in this place called Silicon Valley. No one wants to be here. And essentially, the way he was able to build up Silicon Valley was going around the country, recruiting people to come and move there, and saying, no, seriously, come and work on my company. And then you had the traitorous 8 that left Fairchild Semiconductor to start Intel. And from there, that's what built up into Silicon Valley. So in many ways, Silicon Valley was this kind of no man's land for people who didn't feel like they belonged anywhere else and kind of came in and wanted to work on something innovative. And what happened over the next 40, 50 years is that they kind of built up in juxtaposition to what was happening in other places that were considered the major networks for business. The thing is, disruption is inevitable. Change is inevitable. And if you keep doing the same thing, if you keep being this haven for one specific type of person, then what you did to other regions is going to start to happen to you. And so, I think in many ways, Silicon Valley became this haven for the kind of, for the nerd, right? For the person who really wanted to create something new and crazy and do something against the status quo. But it was definitely the straight, white, male nerd. And unfortunately, there hasn't been a lot, in my opinion, to expand that view in a way that goes beyond charity. So a lot of people will say, oh, we need to do this. It's our duty to do this. No, it's actually good business to do this, because these guys came in, they looked at the problems that they had and figured out ways to solve them, and then realized that their problems were global problems, so you could build businesses for them. More than half the world by 2050 will be on the African continent. More than half the world today looks like me. And if you don't have these people leading these companies and feeling comfortable in this space, not because of charity, but because they feel like this is now the community for them, then you're not really tapping into the future of that disruption. And so, until you can meet women, and we'll find that instead of it being only 17% of funded companies are run by women. It's more balanced to the 50-50 based on the actual setup of the demographics of our country. When you find that, despite that black people make up 12% of the United States demography, and yet only 2% of businesses in this country are run by a black person. Like, those things they're symptoms of the lack of diversity and the lack of acceptance. And so, yes, no, I don't think we're anywhere near there yet, but I also don't think the answer is that it should be happening in Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley is just a place. We're going to have to find other places where other groups feel comfortable and can grow from there.
Sahan, are you just focusing on the Valley, or do you invest all over the place? And do you recognize this portrait of a disaster?
Yeah, actually, I've increasingly started to invest out of the Valley, mostly because the cost of living there is ridiculous. And when you invest in a company, you're paying basically Twilio, Amazon, and landlords who are renting at extraordinarily high prices to people. So recently, I went to on a trip where I was looking at underserved ecosystems that basically investors kind of haven't looked at. It came to my attention that there were a couple of north of $1 billion companies that came out of, Ohio and Indiana, and I was like, we're not looking at these places. So I started investing, in those regions. I'm also looking at Miami, North Carolina, and innovation now. I don't know that there's a Silicon Valley hub that's emerging. It's more distributed. We're starting to see innovation happening all over the world. And so I don't know that everybody always talks about what's the next Silicon Valley, and I don't think that's the right question. I think that was a very good point.
But do you see this change filtering through into greater diversity, or is it still just white, straight men everywhere?
No, it's different everywhere I look. So like if you look at Flint or you look at Detroit, you're not going to find many entrepreneurs there that look like me or look like a white guy. And so I think, like what she said, if Silicon Valley doesn't change, it doesn't really matter because it's going to happen. Brilliant people are everywhere in this world.
And just piggybacking off of that, or reacting to that, it's a problem also at the city level, right? Because I agree that the right question shouldn't be how do you recreate or replicate Silicon Valley across the country, across the world. Cities are also unique labs of experimentation themselves, right? From everything from like sort of the university ecosystem that exists or doesn't exist to how the mayors or like local governments are investing in school districts or investing in skills for the future at the K through 12 level for certain, but also are they investing in late stage adult and continuous education models? And so really what it comes down to is the talent bench, right? And I think one of the biggest problems and the biggest tragedies of the question, is there diversity in tech or Silicon Valley, is assuming that that is the one monolithic sector that needs to solve for X being this diversity challenge. Whereas what we need to do is take Cyan's approach and actually figure out if we run the field and examine different industries across different sectors, across different cities, how those labs of cities are configuring different outcomes by way of that talent pool, by way of how that then attracts follow-on venture dollars, by way of how universities are equipping not only the workforce of their students, but also informing what sort of jobs are going out by talking to local industry on the ground. When you start to map out that ecosystem, then you can start targeting talent in different areas that look like different people that have different capabilities that then inform a boom in another sector. And whether you call that talent, advanced manufacturing, the workforce of tomorrow, or tech, or Silicon Valley, the nomenclature is almost irrelevant. It's sort of sussing out where these core variables are that can then lead to astronomical gains. And I think that's where you find rich diversity, by going into the city level and identifying all of those strengths, as opposed to backing into it as saying, we've got to meet some quotas, or we got to take a charitable step, or the recruiter needs to be able to convey the talking point that we have X percentage of this type of demographic. That is an important effort when it comes to recruiting and diversifying the ranks that we have now, but it is not a long-term sustainable solution to really creating a bench of diverse success.
Vikram, you make a really good point too, because sometimes I wonder, why did they force us all to take calculus and then we all entered this world as if everything is just going to be 1 + 1 = 2? Like, most problems are triangular, most problems are parabolic, right? So when we come at it and try to isolate one variable and keep pushing on that, and we don't see the results, and then we start to blame everything, it's like, what was the point of if X plus Y meets Z? I don't know. Again, whatnot. It was AP Calc years ago, and like when I think about it related to this issue.
Years ago, because you're 30 now.
Yeah, it was years ago, and also because I was advanced. So I took that
Even
early.
longer then, yeah.
Yes, working real hard in Poughkeepsie. That's what we were doing. But no, the reality of the situation is, almost everything is going to be triangular. Take the energy space, for example. If you're thinking about the energy ecosystem and how to change it, you're not just looking at energy technology. You have to look at really the political side, the policy behind it, and what are the rules? How can you move your technology into different spaces and actually deploy your technology, and the different financing mechanisms, the business models around that. If you attempt to only work on one and ignoring the other two, you'll get nowhere. And then even within that, there are more layers. Within energy technology, you can't just talk about transmission because that will influence generation and storage. And I see the same thing here when we're talking about improving diversity in this space. One, it's, yes, definitely the academic institutions, right? But you take a place like Harlem. So when we raised our Series A, we decided to move from downtown all the way up to Harlem. One, because I want to make sure that my team remembers that we're building a global company for a global community, and we want it to be in a microcosm of the world, where you could see, your barber on 96th Street and your hairdresser on 125th and your rabbi on 145th and whatnot. You can see the whole world in front of you and remember that your life is but one life. But also, we're right next door to Columbia. We are 2 steps from City University. Every single engineer I have on my staff either came from Cooper Union, NYU Polytechnic, Columbia, Cornell. We were able to pull from this community, right? So you had the education there. But where we're seeing issues is on the policy side, right? So we have a diverse team, we have smart people, but in California, for better or worse, they've become a bit more lenient in terms of what it takes to put something out there so you can release new technology, so you're not afraid to be disruptive. So then you have to ask, okay, well, New York, or even just like the local government in Harlem, what are you doing to promote new ideas and give these entrepreneurs a platform to showcase what they can do? Because if that's there, now you have a bit of a trifecta, providing financing and making sure that their tech actually reaches the market. That's one thing that California does really well. I actually think that what will continue to hold back the other hubs of entrepreneurship that represent more diverse communities compared to California will actually be the governmental side. Like, if we do not step up and match up with what California is doing in terms of having these kind of special purpose regions where you can deploy new technology and being just more, I think, tenable to the entrepreneur, we're still going to have this slowdown. So it's definitely a triangular problem.
Okay, I'm afraid that's all we have time for, but thank you very much indeed. Cyan, Vikram, and Jessica, please join me. Sorry.
Hello.